So let's chat a little bit about the whole process of conducting an interview, or, if you will, actually a lot of these techniques will also apply when you're having a casual conversation with the subject matter experts about the meaning of their user story, their epic, or whatever it is you want to talk about. I actually recommend, especially if it's going to be a formal meeting, that you put in some formal effort. We recommend that if you're going to be doing an interview or an elicitation meeting, that you prepare for it. I'm going to give you a couple of tools, tips, and tricks on how to do that. Once you've prepared for it, you planned it, you've got it laid out. Once you get into it, there's some other tools, tips, and techniques that I think will help you get the job done better. We'll talk a little bit here about eliciting the requirements, how to get them from the people, and finally, recognizing that it's not over when it's over. We're going to give you some ideas on the follow-up to an effective meeting. Any effective conversation, any effective meeting between two different functional groups or areas, like IT and the business community or whatever else, would be, in my opinion, better served if their meetings ran efficiently and effectively. So that's really what we're trying to get at here, whether it's a casual conversation or a formal elicitation meeting. So first off, before you even get together, as far as preparing is concerned, we highly recommend that you take the time to prepare the questions. Take the time to think about what is it you need to know from this particular individual. If you are in the process of conducting a conversation to make sure that you understand the user story, you might be making sure that you ask, well, if you have a who in the user story, as user story should have, then who else might be interested in this particular feature, function, whatever it is, in doing this thing? Is the who truly the correct party? You also want to make sure that the questions are correct for the individual you're talking to. I talked earlier about making sure you're addressing the correct level of information, that you're trying to get the information that you need from this particular individual based on their areas of responsibility and knowledge. Also recommend making sure that you have the right person in the room, meaning you're not asking somebody who heard it from somebody. We should not be developing applications based on hearsay, but really on the upfront first-person information that the author of the user story or the individual who's actually going to be using the application gives us. We recommend also making sure that you're taking care of little things like logistics, which has to do with when to do the meeting, where to do the meeting. We firmly recommend having a meeting if you're going to be talking to a subject matter expert, either in a neutral location, if you will, in the neutral zone, or if you would prefer it, at their place. We would not recommend having it at your place because there's a question of home right advantage. And you're trying to make the subject matter expert, the person you're talking to, that you're having conversation with or conducting the interview of, have them feel at home, have them feel empowered, have them feel like they are in control. And that will go a long way towards it if you have them on their home turf, if you meet them on their place. You also need to think about how are you going to keep track of the information they give you. Now, I know that most of us have perfect memories. I had a perfect memory, but I forgot where I put it. And ultimately, people with a very good memory are usually very bad at taking notes. I can testify to that from my younger years. Because of that, it's really important to recognize how are you going to keep track of all of the things the person is telling you. If you're having a conversation, according to the Scrum/user story construct, what the developer who is conducting the conversation with the SME would be doing would be asking them questions about how they're going to prove it. They would actually be writing down the tests, historically on the back of the card that contains the user story, in today's world, capturing it in a computer program that they're using to capture that information. But they would ultimately be focused on what are you going to do to make sure that the application does what you want it to do. If I am the BA trying to make sure that I can represent the subject matter expert in the Agile world, then I had better be asking these questions. I had better be prepared for that. Also, I need to make sure up front that the individual that I am inviting knows why we are conducting this conversation, why we're having the meeting, what it is that we're trying to get, what is our objective. Actually, if you're going to invite them or schedule this thing via email, I would highly recommend putting in the email, why do you need the conversation? Why do you need their time? Set the expectations correctly and make sure that you underpromise and overdeliver. Make sure that they know what they're going to get and what they're not going to get out of the meeting if they come when they come to the session. If I'm into the process of trying to get more information about the user story, I need to start to be thinking about those solution level requirements I mentioned earlier, meaning I need to get down to where we can understand from the IT perspective, what are the functions that the application would have to have in order for the user story to be realized? What data does it need? And what are the non-functional dimensions of it? So I really need to be thinking about how we're going to break this down. And in my experience, having a conversation with the subject matter expert about what it is that it's going to be doing is very fruitful, because you can actually exchange ideas. They might bring up functions that I would never in my wildest dreams think of, but they know it because of their experience. They know that this is something that they need the application to do. I'd also make sure that I am using the best medium for representing the information, whether I'm capturing my notes on a flip chart, on an electronic cocktail napkin, depending on where I'm having the meeting. Whatever it is, I want to make sure that I am capturing the information that they are giving me appropriately. There are some ideas about recording the meeting, things like that we'll talk about in a minute. But ultimately, if I am writing things down that they are saying, I might be drawing diagrams, because pictures say a lot more than the words. And all of the studies about how we as human beings communicate indicate that we will walk away from this discussion having very different memories about the words that each of us used during the conversation. What we'd really like to make sure of is that we have the essence, that we have a common understanding of the information that was exchanged. I also want to make sure that I am communicating with the subject matter expert in the mode of communication that is most effective for them. There are some people that like to just talk. They love the verbal. Others indicate that a visual representation helps them a whole lot. These are people that would benefit a lot from diagrams or models or things like that. And some people are readers. They just want to read it. So if you gave them an email up front saying, this is the way I understand it, would you please correct me or anything like that, you might be better off. There have been a bunch of studies done on that visual, verbal, and textual communication. Some of them have been not debunked, but qualified to mean a lot less. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we talk about nonverbal communication a little later. As far as how to do the productive conversation, you have some options. The first option is just an informal conversation. Now, this is the kind of situation where you might be walking down the hall and you bump into somebody that you have been trying to get in touch with for a couple of days and say, hey, wait a minute, while I've got you here, can I ask you a couple of questions? That's an informal conversation, and there's nothing wrong with it if it is appropriate for the topic, if the place is appropriate. Obviously, you might want to run across them in a dining area or in a hall or something like that. I wouldn't recommend having the interview in a restroom or something. The other thing is the next level or the next type of a conversation would be a face-to-face conversation where you're sitting down with each other. Usually this is something that in today's world is more scheduled, more formal, and this is where, like I was saying earlier, I would recommend having it at their office if possible, because if they happen to have need of something to be able to make something clear to you, they have it available at their workplace. You can also use email or IM, instant messaging, nowadays. These are also very popular modes, especially the IM for clarifying a quick question. Nothing better than just shoot off an IM, get your information right away, and just keep on going. We'll talk a little bit more about email interviewing, conversations, whatever you want to call it, a little later on, because there's more detail that I'd like to give you about that. Teleconferencing is also an option. Today's world, very often, given the nature of an organization, many of them are spread around the globe. You'll never have the luxury of getting together, or only very rarely will you have the luxury of getting together one-on-one. So you might end up having to have a teleconference. There are pros and cons to that as well. Finally, if it is especially at the beginning of the project, in the early days in the kickoff, very often we start a project with a workshop. A user story workshop is not an uncommon way of getting started on an Agile project. Actually, just getting a feature list out of for a lean project. You might also get together with a group of subject matter experts. And the ideal thing about a workshop is everybody hears what everybody else is saying, and that tends to ignite ideas. It tends to get them thinking outside the box because they're not stuck inside their own head.